subhanahu wa ta'ala has a plan. Everything has been decreed, and everything is going in your life, in my life, in our lives, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed it and has planned it. And the plan of Allah Azza wa Jal is the most wise. The plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that which is most beneficial. Now at times we may not necessarily see the wisdom, we may not understand at the time the benefit of Allah's plan. And there are times when we will see immediately, we can understand immediately, oh, I see this is why, this was wise, this is beneficial. There are times when we can see that right at the time. But then there are times when things happen and we don't realize the wisdom and the benefit for sometimes years to come. But in order for certain things to line up properly, for there to be a certain outcome down the line, there are things that need to happen today in order for there to be a certain outcome 10 years from now. One of the highlights or one of the evidences for this is the story of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the family of Imran. Right? If we look at the way the story lines up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the story of Isa alayhi salam did not begin with Isa alayhi salam. It began when Allah Ta'ala said that He istafa al Imran, that He chose the family of Imran, which Imran was the father of Maryam. And his wife, Imran's wife, when she became pregnant, she said, "Oh my Lord, I vow to you what's in my stomach," meaning my child. Now at that time, what they used to do is when they would have a child, male child, when the child was old enough to be able to walk around, they would put that child into the service of the masjid. They would give the child over to, I guess the shuyukh of the masjid, and they would serve the masjid, but as a means to learn the religion, so they could be close to the scholars. They would be in the service of the masjid, tending to the masjid, but as they were learning from the scholars in the masjid, but this is what they were doing, this is how they spent their childhood, which is why the wife of Imran, when she delivered a girl, she said, "This is a girl." Right? Like, I wanted my child to be turned over to the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but I delivered a girl. Now at the time, she intended one thing. She wanted one thing. She delivered a girl. At the time that it may not have, how can I turn my daughter over? Because usually this is what we do with our sons. But I had a girl. At the time, it may not have the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who knew that at that time that Maryam would end up becoming the mother of Isa alayhi salam, one of ulul azm min al-rusul. At that time, no one could have predicted that. No one would have said, "Oh yes, my daughter is going to go on to become the mother of one of the greatest men to ever walk the face of the earth." But that's what ended up happening. And so in order for things to line up the way that they were supposed to, the mother of Maryam, the wife of Imran, had to deliver a girl. In order for her to move on to become the mother of Isa alayhi salam. However, that wisdom wasn't realized until years later. Years later. And so my point here is that things happen in our lives in a way that sometimes we don't plan them. In a way that sometimes may not necessarily makes sense to us. We may not necessarily understand the wisdom. We may have planned it this way. We said to ourselves, I want to go in this direction. But every time you go in this direction, you end up going in the opposite direction. Even though you're making dua, oh Allah, send me in this direction. Oh Allah, send me in this direction. But you end up over on this direction. And you're thinking to yourself, Allah's not answering my dua. You say, don't think that. Do not think that. Do not think that Allah has abandoned you. Do not think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left you. Do not believe that Allah is not answering your dua. Just because you're not getting what you want, or because things aren't turning out how you planned, doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a plan for us. That His plan isn't wise, or that He's abandoned us. Because sometimes the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't realized to us except later on down the line. Our job is to believe in Allah. Our job is to do in the here and the now, to do what Allah ta'ala has commanded us, and to leave tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, we leave that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where we rely and our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes in. So Allah ta'ala, His plan is most wise. His plan is what's most beneficial. We do what we're supposed to do in the here and the now, and we leave tomorrow, and we trust in Allah. So we leave tomorrow with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We trust that Allah ta'ala is going to take care of it, because Allah promised us, and Allah's promise is truth. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us. Ask Allah to accept from us our good deeds and our righteous actions. May He overlook our faults and forgive us of our sins.